So today we're going to be talking about SEO, quite a bit actually. Things that frustrate us about search, best practices that you've learned over time, and then things that essentially the audience can take away as actionable tips. So maybe I'll start off by asking you, how has SEO changed in the way you guys approach it in 2014?
Okay, so I think the biggest way it's changed is if we look back, we've been doing SEO for over 10 years now, and back in the days, even when I say back in the days, this even goes back 4 or 5 years ago, we could have a client that comes up to us, they could honestly have a crappy looking website with very little content. We've always heard the word content is king, but the reality was back in the days, they could have a crappy site with little content, and SEO agencies like us, we were still able to help them get rankings on the web through link building and all these other offsite activities that we've done. Over time, Google is now looking at that as web spam and manipulating the search engines, and they've kind of gone back to the point is, look, you have to steer away from that, and that's going against our terms and conditions, and really you have to look at, site content and social signals. So a lot has changed in terms of really optimizing a website. It's no longer just about having great content. It's also about social. It's also about user experience, time spent on website. So it's a number of factors, and it's getting a lot more complex.
Cool.
So I would echo the social indicators. I think that they're becoming a much larger factor in ranking and visibility. And just to be clear, when I say social, I'm not just talking about things that are shared on social networks. I'm also talking about reviews. I kind of lump that in there. I think reviews on platforms all around the internet are becoming a huge indicator.
Okay, that's a really interesting question because it's actually a really hard one to answer. I have to say that I think Google is becoming more and more entrenched in all our lives, especially anybody online. And I think we're seeing them start to really change and test the Google search engine results page. That's changed a lot over the last few years. Things like social signals, which were really important a few years ago, are really not as important from a search engine results perspective. And I think that adapting to how Google's changing things is the challenge, and it's still actually quite unknown. Clearly they've done a lot with Panda, Penguin, Fuji, whatever it's called. And I think that's a good sign for searchers and for businesses. I think they're just trying to clean up, the renegades that made a lot of money trying to usurp the guidelines. I'd like to think it's getting to be a cleaner, more truthful, more relevant place. So hopefully it will pan into that direction.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about the future of search as well, that it is going to be survival of the fittest. But that being said, let me just be contrarian for a second over here. You guys all know Matt Cutts, right? So search engineer from Google, head of their web spam team. Now, I love Cutts for a couple of different reasons, and one of it is him spreading something called FUD. Do you know what FUD is? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So a couple of my friends in the SEO industry that are kind of veterans, been doing it for 10 to 15 years, they believe that a lot of what Google's achieving today, the reason that they've actually cleaned up is because of FUD, essentially. So there are some web spammers out there that are just smarter and know exactly, they've changed their frame of reference around not building one money site that they continue web spamming with, but they're essentially, they're not quite as black hat as they used to be. They're now a little bit more gray hat. Do you think that web spam still works? And you don't have to say it, but just nod your head if you still do it a little bit.
I would have worn my black hat today then.
There's some black on there. That's the
Just a
gray
little bit,
part.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a great hat, by the way.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, what's black hat, what's acceptable right now could very well become a black hat signal in the future. So no is the answer to the question. I find that there's 3 things that I focus on that actually kind of survive the algo updates the best. And one of them is just making sure site structure and code is indexable. So making sure it's search engine friendly. The second one is unique, engaging, and relevant content. And the third one is actual real PR in the form of mentions, citations. They don't have to be links anymore. These are just more information about your business that links back to your URL in some way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I mean, something that's kind of like borderline in which I still see brands and agencies doing, and the reality it still works today, but we don't know what's going to be the repercussions down the road, is we all know now that you have to be very careful when you're building links. It's more like link earning, it's no longer link building. We can't just throw links at a website. But I think now the new way of doing link earning, especially when people know the importance of social signals, is now getting like, the new form is now people saying, well, you know, you do a blog post, we'll send it like 100 retweets and 100 repins and stuff like that. And that, to tell the truth, is working. So these could be dummy accounts, no-name people, but it's still influencing Google, thinking your content is important, people liking it, people are sharing it. But over time, you know, the search engines, not just Google, but over time, I think they're gonna get a lot more smarter. So like having, for example, if I wrote something on digital marketing and I get one retweet from someone like Dev and someone like, for example, like Krista, who they're known to be big influencers and they have a lot of following, is gonna be carried and worth a lot more than me having 1,000 retweets or 1,000 repins from a bunch of nobodies. Which, like I said, it still works today.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Although at the core of it, I think we have to remember SEO is search engine optimization from the search engines. I think I read a study recently by Bright Edge that about 51% of overall website traffic comes from SEO and only about 5% from social. So yeah, there's ways you can optimize social for traffic, but SEO is about the search engines driving traffic.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, we've been hearing a lot about creating the right type of content, and Google has gone as far to change its webmaster guidelines documents around even saying that they're decreasing the amount of importance that they place on things like anchor text, for example, or they're decreasing the amount of importance that links in their overall algorithm hold. This has obviously led to a lot of people and SEOs either rebranding themselves as content marketers or spending a lot more time on building content. Now, what would you guys do if you kept, let's say, doing that for 60 to 90 days, 120 days even, and it wasn't working? How would you reverse engineer or diagnose your efforts and see where it stopped working, and how would you pivot?
So one of the things, that's a good question, because how long do you wait for? So if you make a change to your website, do you wait a day? Do you wait a month? How long do you know? Was that impactful? So one of the things, I mean, we do is we're actually using G-Shift's platform, which it allows us to actually track our clients' rankings every single day. So if there's an algorithm changing Google or anything like that, we could go back to the date and see, did that website for that keyword phrase or several keyword phrases get impacted, and then what were the changes, and we reverse engineer from there. And if we do make new changes to the website, one of the first things you want to know is, did Google even come back to that page itself if you're fixing content on the page? And you could do that by going into Google, typing in site : followed by your domain name, finding that page, and looking at the cache. There's a little, I know it's kind of hard to see, it's like a little green icon underneath the URL, and then Google will actually tell you if it came back to that page and recrawled it. So, but just because they came back and recrawled the page, it still doesn't necessarily mean that they've updated their algorithm. Sometimes you actually have to wait for a full algorithm refresh for Google to actually make those changes. So it's a difficult thing to kind of measure, but as long as you're doing all the right things, you know, over time, hopefully you'll see the results that you need.
Yeah, I don't think it's a one-point solution. Like, clearly there's a number of technical things you can do. I think you have to look at the big picture. You can't get too granular, but I think you have to look at some of the top line trends. The amount of time it takes, he's absolutely right. It's indefinite. It depends on what's happening in search. I mean, I think up to 20-25% of all search terms are net new and haven't happened in Google yet. So how do you account for those things? Like yesterday, you can't account for them yesterday. You have to continue moving forward.
So I'm a big fan. You'll hear me talk about better KPIs for SEO. Obviously, I'm with CallRail. We do call tracking. That is one KPI that I look at that I think is it's a little more closely related to the success of an SEO campaign than rankings, which are becoming more personalized. I mean, rankings could tank and call volume stays the same. Something's going on there. Not exactly decipherable. So better KPIs usually lead to a better evaluation of that change.
Right, great. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and start talking about websites that are larger for larger brands or that service a large audience. So think, for example, an insurance website or a bank or student credit cards for that matter. One of the practices that SEOs use when creating content is mining Google Search Suggest. So literally going into something like keywordtool.io, pulling in literally car insurance for, and then every single term that comes up. So whether it's for seniors, for high-risk drivers, for teenagers, etc. And then those become all your content ideas. The problem, of course, is that you get this huge sort of Excel dump of 5,000 terms that people look for. How would you guys try to prioritize how to actually message that to a client if you had to?
Yeah,
it's a difficult question.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of factors. I mean, the golden rule in SEO with respect to keyword, discovery is you want to look at words that have, high search volume but low competition. Mm-hmm. And then as important is relevancy. So relevancy is about whatever content and page you're driving that traffic to. So, it's a really combination of some of those things. And in the end, it's a matter of, I think, what you want to message to your audience, what kind of information and content your audience is going to find compelling and engaging.
And I guess, you want to make sure that either your product or service at least answers that question and you actually provide it. So a good example is we were just working with a company that they have this product that removes paint. So if you go into one of those tools and type how to remove paint from, it'll say from like wood, carpet, shoes, everything possible down the list. Now, if your product doesn't do it, there's no point of actually writing content on it and saying, hey, our product doesn't remove product from shoes. And then why did you send that traffic there? So that's another way you could filter out that list. So I would use search volume as one. I forgot the name of the tool. There's so many, like Uber Suggest and so forth. There's one that actually puts it in order of what actual they would, I forgot the importance of their own algorithm. But yeah, you could plug it into Google Keyword Tool or Keyword Planner now they call it, and see search volume and just make sure that you actually provide that product or service.
Yeah, and that's really what relevancy means. It's not a metric, but a sense of that it is actually
So I have a question for you actually related to CallRail. So could you tell me a little bit about, on your God view, just like Uber, for example, has this God view of all the cars in the United States and in Canada, for example, that are on the road. Does CallRail have a God view of showing all the phone calls, like some sort of mass aggregate view?
Not today.
Okay, you totally should, because the question I was going to ask is, can you somehow look at your data that you're getting from so many different advertisers around call tracking and track that back to understand consumer intent? Because that's what I wanted to throw into the mix. It's not just about search volume at the end of the day. It's about understanding what particular keywords have the highest amount of consumer intent that drives them to an action, whether that's filling out a form or making a phone call, for example.
Just as a follow-up to the answer, we are looking at doing industry benchmarking.
Okay.
So essentially understanding, hey, you're in this industry and you fall into, you're either below the industry benchmark for call volume, and that may include first-time callers, which is a great KPI for anybody tracking organic campaigns with call tracking optimized numbers. First-time callers is really the KPI that you care about. Because existing callers could be calling the same number. So, not today, but we are looking at aggregating some of the data and offering that as benchmarks.
Sure,
so.
That's great. So the three of you, do you guys use Google Analytics for most of your tracking? I'm assuming, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, what's that?
Do you use Google Analytics?
Yeah,
yes?
for sure.
Okay. So the question is, how do you use Google Analytics in a meaningful way to showcase SEO reporting? I'm not talking about rank tracking specifically, but what things do you do within analytics to showcase ROI from either content or from search?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we primarily do, because I mean, Google Analytics on its own, most of the clients that we work with, they already have it on their website, but they don't know what to do with it. They get these nice little charts with these pie graphs and lines, but no one really tells them how to take that data, mine it, and what business decisions that they need to make. Now, specifically from a search perspective, if you want to say, what could you do better or worse and so forth, I mean, I think me and Krista were just talking about this earlier. It's surprising how many people have analytics on their website, but they don't have any goals configured. So that's the biggest, first of all, it's hard to make any decisions if you don't have any goals configured. And if you're saying, well, you know what, I'm not e-commerce, or I don't have someone signing up for a form or anything like that, there's still always what the purpose of your website is. So if it's time spent on website or whatever you do, you're actually trying to get someone to do, you want to make sure that you configure your analytics to track that. And then, of course, your search engine, you can look at your traffic to see how many conversions you got out of that metric.
Okay.
I mean, one of the easiest reports that anybody can dive into really quickly is just looking at your top pages.
Makes sense.
I try to keep things simple with Google Analytics. It's a very, very robust, powerful program, and you can set it up to track events and even beyond. There's plugins beyond that. But I find top pages is really effective. Again, just realize that not everybody is going to visit your website that might convert. They may see you in a directory and either make a phone call or come into the store. So those are some offline metrics that need to be accounted for in some way.
Okay.
Yeah, just as an adjunct, the top pages, specifically the top landing pages. I mean, not everybody is going to come to your website on your homepage, and generally you spend a lot of time on your homepage making sure it's just tickety-boo. But there's other like top landing pages where your visitors are going to come in, so you want to focus on those. And it's not just that you're getting traffic to those pages, but are you getting the right traffic? So you want to look at things like bounce rate. The people that you're getting in there, are they staying on the site? Are they moving to other pages? Are you giving them sort of a reason to navigate your site beyond that first landing page? So some of those signals can help you decipher, whether that traffic coming from search is in fact the right traffic and if it's sticking or not.
Yeah, it's great. I think that a couple of things that I would add that are really simple things to do in analytics are, if you have goals, great. Have goal values as well, because that attaches a dollar figure to what your goals are actually worth. It's something your clients can actually understand, because the word conversion doesn't always actually mean anything to a client at the end of the day. Usually with many of our clients, they always focus on this one thing, like a goal 20, for example. We care just about that particular goal. It has to have a value to it. So if you don't know what the value of the goals are, ask your client what one customer is worth to them, either based on their lifetime value or even the first time purchase that they actually make. The other thing that I could probably add over there is if you've never experimented with Google Analytics custom reports, just go into the custom reports library. There's a shared library over there. And if you haven't heard about Avinash Kaushik, then you've been living under a rock. He has a wonderful library of some of the custom reports that you can just import very quickly into analytics, including things like looking at visitor acquisition or engagement, for example, and a couple of micro reports for paid search as well. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit. When you're thinking about creating websites today, specifically like high quality content, the type of stuff that takes maybe 8 weeks even to come up with. So I'm talking about visually rich content, HTML5 based content, for example, interactive infographics, or even one-pager websites. We've now started delving away from research and content itself into development work as well. How important is it in 2014 for a quote-unquote SEO to be savvy with development and how that might affect search?
Yeah, I actually think they go hand in hand. So it's even everything from your sitemap to your navigation. And what we're finding now with a lot of the new designs and so forth, we're getting longer pages, like they're stacked. Where before, back in the days, we're like, you shouldn't have people scroll, keep everything above the fold. But now most people are using tablets and so forth. And unfortunately, tablets are still not as fast as laptops. So if you have to click and wait for the page to load, people don't like doing that. They like flicking their finger. And that also becomes a challenge from a search perspective, because does Google see now your content is beneath the fold and now you're having less pages? So this is where your developer and the content people and the SEO people, it's not separate teams. They all really have to work together. And I think over time, Google's going to have to do a better job understanding, are people actually spending time on your website? Are they finding valuable content and so forth? I mean, I was just reading upon just right now, they purchased some type of patent where they could actually now understand when you're watching television to see what's happening there, and then when you go on search, it could actually influence it. So if they've got that type of, if that's the direction they're heading towards, I mean, they will have a good understanding generally if they're on your website, if people are actually engaged.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the point he made, developing, designing websites, building content, managing content management, it's a multidisciplinary sort of multifaceted approach. It takes a lot of different skill sets and knowledge, and getting those people to work to work together. I mean, if you have, interesting design techniques that are coming around, parallax, scrolling. So those are web design techniques. A web designer can't know everything. They really need to work with a good developer that can code those things so that they are indexable and search engine friendly, and they have to work with the content team to make sure that, the keywords and content are all going to marry together. So it's a really multidisciplinary team of really smart people that need to work together to get all those things, in sync.
I would add that I worked for a larger company. We were managing 35,000 websites for local search clients.
That's a lot.
I was on the product performance team for organic product, and we had many interdepartmental, we'll call them issues, with product and development. Being on the organic performance side, we were basically looking at all the things we could do to move the needle on performance. And so I would say absolutely, if not good communication, they need to be in the same department.
Right.
Or at least there needs to be a conversation. And we kind of shifted this towards the end of my tenure there, but we had a conversation as development was going on, but before they got into it, to make sure they understand the assets that were really important for the SEO and anatomical pieces of the website that we needed to be right. And that helped out considerably.
Cool. So based on some of these newer technologies that are coming out, a lot of websites are being built within JavaScript, which is a client-side way of serving information. So just for everybody over here, if you're building a parallax website and it's a brand that says, hey, I would love to have a one-pager website, it's the in thing right now, what are some SEO pitfalls that a company should be aware of when building a one-pager website?
It takes Google a little while to catch up to these things. So I always say hedge your bet on a new design with making sure that you're retaining indexable individual URLs with the same content. And I think there's ways to do that to avoid duplicate content issues and also some of the design pitfalls. But I would say Google doesn't catch up as quickly as design, so keep that in mind and hedge your bet with that.
Yeah, and I think this has always been the challenge with those one-page websites, and because generally speaking, the number of pages your website have is one factor of many, many, many factors. So just because your website has more pages doesn't necessarily mean rank better. But the general thought process is, if I'm an insurance company and Google looks at my website, I've got a 100-page website, and my competitor or someone else has a one-page website. They probably generally think if someone types in types of auto insurance or home insurance, that my 100-page website is going to help answer that user's question. Again, I just want to emphasize, it doesn't mean just because you have more pages, you're going to rank better, but it is a factor that those companies that are considering just this one-page design, they might fall into a pitfall of convincing Google they actually have enough substance to actually rank.
Okay, that's a great answer. So how many of you in our audience today actually have a parallax website, one-pager website? Do your clients have a one-page website? Okay, so you probably want to look at something called pre-rendering with one-page websites, because the problem becomes when you click on those tabs that kind of scroll down and you can see the information. The problem with that is that Google still sees that as only one page, and usually that information is served via Ajax, some sort of JavaScript solution. Sometimes it could be jQuery, sometimes it's Angular or Backbone.js, for example. Look at something called pre-rendering or pre-caching to help out and submit each of those content sections as its own unique page to Google. Google still needs to understand that they're themed pages with unique siloed content. Otherwise, you're out of luck. We haven't sworn yet. We have to get some swearing in.
Go right ahead.
No shit.
No shit. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit, guys. And we've been talking a lot about technical and on-page and content. Let's go from content into outreach, PR, distribution, and link building, right? So what are some of the tried and tested things that you've done to have better results at email-based or phone-based outreach to secure links?
We haven't had experience with phone-based and so forth, but just generally in terms of link building, we still know there's a core websites that you submit your website to, like Google Local, Yahoo Local, City Search, Insider Pages. There's some standard stuff that your business should be listed on, especially if you're a local business. But in terms of link earning and PR and just gathering real links and not just going to directories and submitting clients' websites. One of the things that we've been testing and kind of doing is for a whole bunch of our keyword phrases, let's just say I'm working with a client and the whole bunch of keyword phrases, we try to find out who are the top 3 competitors that are coming up for majority of these phrases. And then there's free tools out there and there's paid tools out there like Href and Majestic SEO. There's, I think, Moz as Open Site Explorer. There's a whole bunch of tools out there that allow you to plug in these domain names and actually export all the links that they're getting back to their website. So what we're kind of doing with this is where I think someone before talked about working Excel and working magic with it. So you could take this list of all these domain names now and you could pump them into one Excel sheet, and then you could actually let Excel do the homework and actually finds out what are the common domain names that each one of those 3 competitors share. So this is one way you could actually know that, if my competitors are all getting a link from xyz.com and they're all ranking well in Google, there's a good probability if I could acquire that link for my client, it's actually meaningful. And it doesn't mean like an SEO team could just simply submit a link. This might be like a real, like an InboundCon where there's a sponsor, a logo, and things like that. So it's not just now about a team just going out there and building links. It's really the best of working with the PR and getting real links. So that's one of the things that we're doing.
Okay.
I find this is one of the hardest things to actually do now with the recent algorithm updates remotely and without client compliance. I find that link building now is best done when it's looked at as a PR campaign and treated like public relations people treat things. So relationships are important. Go to events. Talk to people and get verbal yeses. Can I do a blog post? Would you entertain me doing a guest blog post on this particular topic? I think those are the ways to create links that are going to be lasting and they're going to survive the algo updates.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that link building is hard. It's a little bit like trying to get laid very often. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean,
well, you
link
could pay
building,
for
it's
it. And you could pay for links.
But then you could catch something at that
Yeah,
point in time.
exactly.
That's true.
You don't want to catch something if you pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, link building, I mean, it's a journey. It's an investment over time, right? I mean, it is a major factor in the overall algorithm, backlinks. Yeah. It's not just a one-shot wonder, but it's an investment over time and a discipline of having that plan and continuing to pursue it and thinking of different techniques and tactics to continue building not only how many links you have, but from how many sites and from quality sites.
So, I mean, Mark, you mentioned PR, and I think that it's a very astute way of looking at link building of today. And so one of the things that I think is that traditional PR agencies who've now turned into social media agencies and haven't quite ventured into SEO sometimes have a bit of a leg up because they do have the existing relationships. They do know how to pitch a story. And they know how to do the outreach. They're like a dog on the bone when it comes to pitching a story. What can SEO or traditional quote-unquote SEO agencies or companies or specialists, for example, learn from these PR professionals?
Tactics, strategy of how to build relationships, and a lot of it is training clients on these things. And this is the variable that's the hardest thing to control when you're working on SEO for anybody, whether it's your own company or whether you're an agency, is getting that understanding of how to work those relationships in the same way that the PR companies do it,
right?
Transferred over to your client, or who can actually make those connections. So I think training is a big part of this. It's also the biggest variable. You can't pay someone to force train you. You have to have willing and compliant clients.
And I think that's one of the challenges that we face as well, especially educating the client in terms of their involvement now. Because, I mean, you could tell a client, like, look, you need to be on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, all this stuff, write content. And they're like, who's got time for that? We've got a business to run. And then they rely on the agency to help with all this stuff. But then we're going back and saying, well, now you need to do this, this, and this. And this becomes frustrating for them, and it's a challenge. So, but it's, like you said, it's about educating them and training them in terms of the importance of where it's all going.
Yeah, I agree. Training is key. So I actually teach digital marketing at the University of Toronto. And I think there was a study not long ago that came out that about 80% of digital marketers have no formal training. They're all learning on the job. And that can be pretty frustrating, especially in a field that's so dynamic. There's so much to know. So I would certainly encourage anybody to take some formal training. I think it'll give you a leg up and give you a foundation to, carry forward.
There's also some new tools that are coming out that help you manage this. I don't know who all in here knows who Mike Blumenthal is. He's a local SEO guy. He's working on a project called Get 5 Stars, get5stars.com, that helps manage the review acquisition process, which is also, it's in the same realm as what we're talking about. It's basically asking people to do something that you can't control.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my suggestion to anybody who's a data-driven marketer today is start learning how to tell stories, right? And then learn how to pitch them and A/B test them as well. So whether you're using something like BuzzStream to manage your email outreach and being able to split test different kinds of messages over there, there's software like Pitchbox that's fairly new as well. It does the same concept. It just creates a workflow for you to be able to reach out to journalists and get links that way. And we have IT World Canada in the room today, and it's a good way of being able to invite the press to your events, for example, and create a natural, organic way of getting coverage, links, and social mentions, right? Okay, so let's switch gears. We're going to talk about 3 facets of search. So we're obviously in a world today of search where it's no longer the 10 blue links. We have video results, image results, news results, for example, and local search results, right? If you were to pick one of those channels, which one would you work on the most if your business was, let's say, a small business?
That's a good question. So again, it depends on what you're doing. So for example, if I'm a local business, like a dentist, plumber, real estate agent, florist, things like that, in my opinion, like that maps, if I had to pick one, the map section is the most important because that's the first thing people see. They want to see a phone number, they want to pick up the phone and call. If I'm in a business where I'm selling education material, like how to change a light bulb and things like that, people, in my opinion, again, would more likely to watch a YouTube video than read content. But if you could provide both, that's great. So again, it would depend on your business, regardless if you're a small or large business, about who your audience is and where they're probably looking in terms of the SERPs.
That makes a lot of sense.
Maps is huge. If you're a location-based business, I call them present-to-purchase businesses. If your customers have to be present to purchase your service or product, maps is absolutely huge. That gets into an entire tactical conversation about NAP consistency, name, address, phone number consistency. But secondary to that, I think what's happening with the SERPs, with the different pieces of media that are coming in, is essentially videos becoming more important, even slides to a certain degree. Now this is going to depend on the business. If you have a florist, you don't want to do a slide on. You probably are not going to benefit as much from having a entire presentation on slideshare.net about florists if you're a local florist. But I think videos is something that is underused, especially in the location-based marketing realm.
Yeah, I would just add for like small business, definitely local is important, and local is also most important for mobile. So I would say small businesses should focus on mobile, having a mobile site, having shorter, succinct content, and really optimizing for mobile local search.
Right. So on the topic of mobile, Google's come out with, they're pretty strongly recommending that you, instead of having a desktop website and a mobile website, you build one website and make sure it's responsive. Now, we've gone through the process of responsive websites a couple of different times, and what we've noticed is that depending on who's building them and how they're building them, a responsive website can actually be slower sometimes than building 2 different sites and serving them adaptively. So if that is the case, and honestly, website speed in general is a huge part of the ranking algorithm, what are some things that you guys would recommend on how to speed up the load speed of sites?
One of the quick things you guys could do is go to Google, and I think if you search for Google speed test, Google has their own, you could put in your web URL, and it actually will show you how quickly your website loads on desktop, laptop, and mobile, and it gives you a whole bunch of recommendations. It's scale from 0 to 100, and it'll tell you from a web development standpoint, so if you're not technical, don't worry about it, but it'll say that you could fix your CSS, you could do this, you could do that, and then take that information, go back to your webmaster, whoever that may be, and sometimes you might be limited based on your platform and your technology, but if they could at least do most of the things that, at least this is from Google telling you, I think that's a pretty good way, a start anyways.
Yeah, I would go right there, just as you said.
I would also say if you're not familiar with caching, get familiar with it. It's essentially a lot of websites like WordPress, they're dynamically created, the page right then and there. And there's some fantastic caching plugins for WordPress that basically speed up your site considerably. So.
Let's turn the example on its head. And so we were talking about small businesses. Now let's talk about a large business which has a large focus. They have thousands and thousands of pages on their site. So maybe it's an e-commerce site like the Bay site, for example. Could be Amazon.ca, for example. What are some of the biggest considerations when thinking about SEO for a large website with thousands, if not millions, of pages?
Well, I personally think you're sitting in a good seat. Unfortunately, that's the way, Google respects big brands. So if a big brand, for example, wrote an article, not even an article on me, let's just say they mentioned my name. I know I got a pretty unique name, Voltage Guild. It's not that competitive. In fact, before, if you type voltage, it said, did you mean voltage? So, but anyways, but now if you type it in, it actually shows my Facebook, my Twitter. But again, just going to that point, if a big brand wrote just a sentence about me and that's it, there's a strong probability that it will naturally appear on page one quite highly. So I just think in terms of where they're positioned, they're in a good position with Google, but just make sure that you're still providing content and information that your visitors want.
I would add that you need to become a little bit more you need to think more like a data scientist if you have a large site with a lot of different pages. As you jump into Excel, which is probably one of the best tools you can use for a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, you're going to need to think a little bit more on data science level with that many pages to understand really what's going on.
The good part about these kinds of corporations is they actually have the resources to staff and head count these kinds of efforts and actually put in proper disciplines and governance and train their people so that they can just get better and better and optimize those kinds of things. So they clearly have an advantage with respect to getting the right resources on the task as well.
Yeah, that's an important part about how do you even organize the way workflows work within an overall SEO project, and that's super important in a large organization. So I guess we're moving towards the last question now, guys. So in marketing, in digital marketing in general, and in life really, the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle really applies. And in fact, I believe the 80-20 rule of the 80-20 rule, so basically if you did that, you would end up seeing that 4% of your efforts will generate 64% of your returns, okay? So the 80-20 squared almost. If you had to only dedicate 4% of your time on something that's SEO related, what would it be and why?
4%.
It's a great question, isn't it?
I'm thinking, how much time is that every day?
Okay, well, let me try to take a stab at this. I mean, the easy answer is always just to say content, right? Because content is one of the most important factors of SEO. But again, that doesn't mean just because you put all your effort in content, if it's not engaging content, if your website's not well structured, and if it's not, all that stuff that we talked about. So it's hard to just pick out one element. If you're to be focused, if you're spending the time and effort to do something, you want to make sure that it works all the way.
Yeah, let me give you some context on what that actually means to
Thank
make
you.
the number a bit more digestible. 4% of your entire work month is 8 hours, okay? So that's basically one work day. If you could take one day, and assuming you work all 30 days, which is not the case, of course, but if it was, it is for me, but if it was, what would you spend that entire day on?
Yeah, so I would do analytics. I would just look at the data, see where the gaps are, see where you're suffering and where you can improve it. I would spend the time on the data to identify the opportunities for improvement.
Okay.
I have a lot more questions about this scenario, but it's like there's a lot of contingencies here. But I would focus on KPIs that matter to the business the most. And I want to get as close to closing the revenue gap with those KPIs as I can, as someone working on SEO.
And I'm going to have to agree with the group here because in most cases, as opposed to trying to think of pushing more traffic through the door and trying to get more visitors, you might spend better time at figuring out why your current visitors are not converting and taking the actions that you want them on your website. Now, if you're in a case where you don't have any visitors or that much, then obviously that's not the case. Then you start looking at, do I need to do brand awareness? Because SEO is a long-term strategy. So maybe that's not your answer, and you got to do paid search marketing or social or display and retargeting, and that's where I would take that angle.
So let me summarize sort of maybe the trifecta of answers over here. What you could do in 8 hours, conceivably, and without being Superman, of course, is go look at your analytics and your top landing pages report. Figure out the page, order it by conversions, and order it based on visitors as well. So you're looking at the page that has the most amount of visits and the highest number of conversions. Go to that page, go to something like Qualaroo or Google Insights, for example. They have a free survey tool. Follow Chris's advice around asking users what they like and don't like about that particular page. Deploy the actual survey, and then add a little bit of content to that page so that it starts ranking better and getting even better traffic if it's not already ranking at the top for its terms. And you're only affecting one page on the entire site. If you did that, you'd see a measurable lift within that 1 day of effort. Cool. Well, thank you guys for the time and for answering the questions of the SEO panel. It's we're going to break now, I think, for what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes? And then we'll be back at 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Thanks.